I can still replay that moment in my head, like a frozen frame, every detail sharp, every word cutting just as deeply as it did back then. I was standing at the end of a long mahogany conference table inside Halcyon Dynamics' executive boardroom, carefully placing freshly printed acquisition documents into leather binders. The room carried that familiar scent of polished wood, expensive cologne, and quiet authority. Around the table sat the company's most powerful figures directors, advisors, legal heads, all focused on what was supposed to be the biggest deal of the year. At the center of it all was Victor Langford, our CEO, a man who ran the company like it was his personal empire. "Casey!" he called out suddenly, his tone light but edged with mockery. My name landed in the room like a punchline. "You're a secretary," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "Not a lawyer. Maybe stick to stapling documents instead of trying to interpret them." A few executives laughed, others smirked and quickly looked away. If you think that one sentence of his was the exact spark that would later make him regret everything, go ahead and like this video. Before we continue, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And what's the temperature there? Drop it in the comments. Now, come back into that room with me. I felt the heat creeping up my neck, but I didn't let it show. I had been at Halcyon for 8 years, long enough to understand how this room worked, long enough to know when silence was safer than pride. Still, I stepped forward and placed the binder in front of him. "There's something in the contract you might want legal to double-check," I said calmly, tapping a page near the back. "It could be important." Victor barely glanced at it. "Leave it," he said dismissively. I didn't move. "It's a loophole," I added, keeping my voice steady. Page 312, subsection D. It allows third-party licensing claims under dormant clauses. That made a few heads lift, but Victor only scoffed. Louder this time. "Please," he said. "I have 3 Ivy League lawyers working on this deal." His eyes locked onto mine, cold and certain. "If they're not worried?" "I'm not worried." The room fell quiet, and I don't pay you to think. A few more chuckles followed. I nodded slowly. "Understood." "Sir." Outwardly, I stayed composed, professional, invisible, just like they expected. But inside, something shifted. Because this wasn't just arrogance. This was negligence. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't willing to let it slide. You know, this story is a work of fiction shaped and elevated with the help of artificial intelligence to make it more engaging and meaningful. What matters most are the lessons hidden within it. I hope you'll be able to feel that too. Now, let's continue. That night, long after the office lights had dimmed and the last of the executives had gone home, I stayed behind. It wasn't unusual, to them. I was always the one still at my desk, typing quietly, finishing notes no one else wanted to deal with. Invisible habits are easy to maintain when people stop paying attention. But I wasn't working on meeting summaries. I pulled up the full acquisition contract again, all 500 pages of it, and started from the beginning. Slowly, methodically, line by line, every clause, every cross-reference, every footnote that most people would scroll past without a second thought. The deeper I went, the tighter the feeling in my chest became. By the time I reached page 312, I already knew something was wrong. I stopped, scrolled back, read it again. Subsection D. The language was dense, buried under layers of legal phrasing designed to look routine. But it wasn't. Not even close. The clause outlined a dormant licensing provision, one that had been carried forward from an older version of the agreement. It allowed a third party to assume licensing rights to the company's core software under specific conditions. My eyes moved to the trigger requirement, a formal claim, filed before the acquisition closed, with a nominal payment. I blinked. Leaning closer to the screen, the amount required was listed in plain text. $1. For a moment, I just stared at it, letting the weight of what I was reading settle in. This wasn't a minor oversight. This wasn't a technicality that could be brushed aside or corrected later. If someone invoked this clause before the deal finalized, they wouldn't just disrupt the acquisition, they would control the very asset Halcyon was trying to buy. Without that license, the entire $90 million deal would collapse instantly. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, the quiet office suddenly feeling too still. They hadn't just missed a detail. They had overlooked a loaded weapon hidden in their own contract, and no one in that room had even realized it was there. I didn't close the document right away. Instead, I read that clause again, slower this time, tracing each line like I was trying to find a flaw in my own understanding. But the meaning didn't change. It was real. It was valid. And most importantly, it was still active. For years, I had told myself that staying quiet was the smart choice, that keeping my head down and doing my job would eventually earn me respect. But standing in that boardroom earlier, being dismissed like I didn't even belong in the conversation, something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about being ignored when I was right. I turned my chair toward the window, staring out at the empty city lights below. The deal would close in less than a week. Once it did, the clause would become irrelevant, buried again under layers of ownership and paperwork, unless someone acted first. The thought didn't feel reckless. It felt precise. I opened a new tab and began researching filing procedures tied to dormant licensing claims, legal databases, compliance guidelines, archived corporate filings. The more I read, the clearer it became. The clause hadn't just been overlooked, it had been carried forward unchanged for over 2 decades, which meant it was still enforceable. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in years. Daniel Mercer. We had studied together in college before he went into corporate compliance law, if anyone could confirm what I was seeing. It was him. He answered on the third ring, voice tired but alert. "Casey, I need you to look at something," I said, already pulling the clause into a secure file. "Tell me if I'm reading this correctly." There was a pause as I sent it over. Minutes passed in silence while he reviewed it. Then he exhaled sharply. "Where did you find this? In an active acquisition contract?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Casey, if this is filed properly before closing, it's binding." I closed my eyes briefly, letting that sink in. What would it take, I asked? A formal claim, clean documentation, and timing. He said, "Perfect timing." I ended the call a few minutes later, my path no longer uncertain. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to what they thought of me. I was deciding what came next. The next morning felt strangely ordinary, almost as if nothing had changed. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, conversations drifting between desks. People moved with confidence, completely unaware that a critical piece of their biggest deal was already slipping out of their control. I sat at my desk just outside Victor Langford's office, reviewing emails like I always did. Calm, focused, predictable, on the surface. I was exactly who they believed I was, but inside my bag, neatly folded between a legal envelope and my notebook, was everything they had failed to notice. A completed claim form, a printed copy of the clause, and a single dollar. I had gone over the documents 3 times that morning before leaving my apartment, checking every detail, every requirement Daniel had outlined. No errors, no assumptions, just facts, aligned exactly with what the contract allowed. At 12:43 p.m., I stood up from my desk. "Lunch," I said casually to no one in particular. No one looked up. The notary office was only a few blocks away, a quiet place with glass doors and neutral walls, the kind of place people walked into every day without thinking twice. I stepped inside, greeted by a woman in her 60s with sharp, observant eyes. "I need to file a formal claim," I said, sliding the documents across the desk. She reviewed them carefully, her expression unreadable at first. Then her eyebrow lifted slightly as she reached the payment section. $1? She asked. Yes. She gave a faint, knowing smile, but said nothing more. Within minutes, everything was stamped, signed, and officially recorded. The transaction was clean, legal, complete. I placed the dollar on the counter, watching as she logged it without hesitation. Good luck, she said quietly. I nodded once. Thank you. When I stepped back outside, the city felt the same. Cars moved. People passed by. Nothing looked different, but something had changed. By the time I returned to the office and sat back at my desk, no one noticed anything unusual, which was exactly the point. The first day passed without anything unusual happening. Meetings continued, emails flowed, and the acquisition team moved forward as if everything was perfectly on track. If there were any signs of disruption, they were too subtle for anyone to notice. Even I started to wonder if the impact would come later than expected. By the second day, that quiet confidence began to crack. At 9:12 a.m., I noticed a shift. One of the senior legal advisors rushed past my desk without his usual greeting, his expression tight, distracted. Minutes later, another followed, heading straight into Victor Langford's office. The door closed sharply behind them. Voices carried faintly through the glass, low at first, then sharper. How? By mid-morning, the tension had spread. The legal team gathered in the boardroom. Laptops open, papers scattered, conversations clipped and urgent. People who usually moved with calm authority were now speaking in hushed bursts, glancing at each other like something had gone very wrong. I kept my eyes on my screen, typing steadily, listening without appearing to. Fragments of conversation drifted through the hallway. There's a claim. Who filed it? The license, it's locked. That's not possible. Around noon, an emergency meeting was called for the executive team. Doors shut, blinds lowered. The usual rhythm of the office dissolved into silence, broken only by whispers. I didn't need to be inside that room to understand what was happening. They had found it, and now they were realizing the implications. Without that license, the acquisition couldn't proceed. The entire deal, months of negotiations, millions in preparation, was now hanging by a thread because of a clause they had dismissed. I sat quietly at my desk, hands resting near the keyboard. My expression unchanged. For 8 years, I had watched decisions being made above me, outcomes decided in rooms I wasn't invited into. This time was different. That afternoon, Victor walked past my desk without his usual confidence. His jaw was tight, his stride faster than normal. He didn't look at me, but he didn't need to, because for the first time, the balance had shifted and he could feel it. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even reached the office. The caller ID flashed one name, Victor Langford. I stared at it for a second, then answered. Casey, he said, his voice controlled. Almost polite, but there was something tight underneath it. I need you in my office, now. I'll be right there, I replied. The walk down the corridor felt different this time. Conversations faded as I passed. A few people looked up, then quickly looked away. The glass walls reflected a version of me I barely recognized. Calm, steady, not shrinking. When I stepped inside his office, the air felt colder. Victor stood near the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline. He didn't turn immediately. Close the door, he said. I did. Have a seat. I sat. He remained standing for a moment longer, before finally turning to face me. I've been informed, he began slowly, that a dormant license claim has been filed against our acquisition. I said nothing. His eyes locked onto mine. Imagine my surprise when I found out it was filed by my secretary. The word lingered, heavy with meaning. I followed the process outlined in the contract. I said evenly, it's a legal claim. A humorless laugh escaped him. Legal or not, You had no authority to interfere with a deal of this scale. He snapped. You've jeopardized $90 million. I exercised a public clause your legal team overlooked. I replied. As of now, I hold the licensing rights required to complete the deal. Silence filled the room. Then he shifted tactics. What do you want? He asked, moving behind his desk. Money, a payout. Fine, name your price. I'll buy it back. Quietly, I held his gaze. I didn't do this for money. His expression faltered. Just slightly. Then, why I leaned forward. My voice calm but firm. Because you dismissed me like I didn't matter. Like I wasn't capable of understanding what was right in front of you. He said nothing. This isn't about taking something from you. I continued. It's about proving that you were wrong to ignore me. The tension between us sharpened. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. I stood. No, I replied. You already made one. And this time, I walked out without waiting for permission. Do you agree with what I did, using a legal loophole they ignored to take control of the deal after being dismissed? Hit the like button to support me. The hours after I walked out of Victor's office felt strangely quiet, like the calm before something inevitable. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and continued working as if nothing had happened. But the air around me had changed. Conversations dropped when I passed. Glances lingered a second too long. By late afternoon, the first move came. At exactly 5:03 p.m., an email appeared in my inbox. Subject: formal inquiry into conduct. Immediate response required. I opened it without hesitation. HR was launching an investigation into unauthorized interference with corporate contractual agreements. The wording was careful, but the intent was obvious. They were trying to frame me before I could defend myself. I almost smiled. I had expected this. Instead of replying, I forwarded the email to my attorney, Marcus Hale. I had contacted him the same night I filed the claim. I wasn't stepping into this without protection. His response came quickly. Short, direct, do not engage. Let them move first. The next morning, things escalated. I arrived at my desk to find my computer locked. A red notification filled the screen. Access restricted. Contact IT support. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, then calmly turned away. At 8:20 a.m., I was called into HR. Two people were waiting, the head of HR and a corporate counsel I had never seen before. Their expressions were professional, but tense. We've temporarily suspended your system access, the HR director said, folding her hands neatly. Pending the outcome of our investigation. An investigation into a lawful claim I filed independently. Outside company resources, I asked. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. We're following protocol, so am I replied. I placed a document on the table, a formal notice from my attorney. It outlined, in precise legal language, that any retaliatory action, including restricting access or attempting to discredit me, would be challenged immediately. The counsel read it, jaw tightening. Is this a threat? Ms. Reed. I met his eyes. No, it's a record. The room fell silent, because at that moment, the pressure they were trying to apply had already turned into evidence. By noon, the atmosphere across Halcyon Dynamics had shifted again. But this time, the tension wasn't centered on me. It was moving upward, toward the executive floor. Conversations grew sharper, more cautious. Doors that were usually open stayed closed, and one name began circulating in low voices. Elliot Grayson, the chairman of the board. I didn't expect the call to come so quickly, but at 2:10 p.m., my phone rang. Casey Reed, a calm voice asked. Yes, this is Elliot Grayson. I believe we need to speak 20 minutes later. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor. Elliot wasn't what I expected. No raised voice, no intimidation, just quiet authority and a steady, observant gaze. Walk me through everything, he said. So I did. From the moment I raised the concern to the exact clause I found. I explained the dormant license provision, the filing process, and the timing. I showed him the documents, the stamped claim, and my legal correspondence. Clear, direct, factual. When I finished, silence filled the room. "You're aware of the position this puts the company in," he said. "With respect, sir," I replied. "I didn't create the risk. I followed a clause that was already there. It was simply ignored." He studied me. "And Mr. Langford knew about this. Yes, did he act? He dismissed it." Elliot nodded slowly. "I see this was no longer just about me and Victor. It was bigger than that. I'm not looking for attention," I said. "I'm looking for accountability." He gave a small, deliberate nod. And in that moment, I knew this had gone beyond Victor's control. By the following morning, the tension had reached its peak. At 2:15 p.m., I was called into the main boardroom. This time, every seat was filled, senior board members, legal advisors, compliance officers all present, and at the far end of the table sat Victor Langford, his posture rigid, his expression tightly controlled. Elliot Grayson began without delay. "We've reviewed all documentation regarding the acquisition and the licensing claim," he said, his voice steady. "We'll proceed with clarifying key decisions." His attention turned to Victor. "Mr. Langford, were you made aware of the clause Miss Reed referenced prior to the claim being filed?" Victor hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes. Did you investigate?" The concerned silence stretched across the room. "No." A quiet ripple moved through the board. What followed was systematic and precise. Each decision Victor had made, every dismissal, every attempt to contain the situation was examined. His responses grew shorter, less certain. Finally, Elliot spoke again. "Effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave, pending further review." Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The room shifted. Then Elliot turned to me. "Ms. Reed, your actions were within legal bounds and executed independently. That is noted, for the first time. The truth didn't need defending. It was already established." 2 days later, the official announcement was sent out in a brief internal memo. Victor Langford had stepped down as CEO, citing personal reasons, no speech, no farewell, just a quiet exit that left more questions than answers. But inside the company, everyone knew the truth. The acquisition didn't collapse. Instead, it was rebuilt. Under Elliot Grayson's direction, the entire deal was reviewed from the ground up, every clause rechecked, every risk addressed, every assumption challenged. This time, nothing was overlooked. And unexpectedly, I was asked to be part of that process, not as an assistant, as an advisor. "Your understanding of the contract prevented a critical failure," Elliot told me during our first meeting. "We need that level of attention moving forward." I accepted, but on my terms, clear authority, direct input, no more being ignored. For the next 2 weeks, I worked alongside the legal team, ensuring the deal closed cleanly, no loopholes, no blind spots. When it finally went through, it wasn't just a success, it was solid. I didn't take anything from the company. I didn't destroy it. I helped fix what was broken, because in the end, this was never about revenge. It was about proving that being underestimated doesn't make you powerless. It just means they weren't paying attention. This story reminded me of something powerful. Your value isn't defined by how others see you, but by how deeply you understand your own worth. And when the moment comes, you have to be brave enough to stand by it. Looking back, I walked away with 3 lessons that stayed with me. First, never underestimate the power of knowledge. The smallest detail, the one everyone ignores, can change everything if you truly understand it. Second, respect isn't always given for hard work alone. Sometimes, you have to claim your voice and refuse to be invisible. Third, timing matters just as much as action. Knowing when to act can turn a quiet decision into a defining moment. Now I'm curious. Which lesson left the strongest impression on you? If this story made you think differently, even just a little, I'd love for you to be part of this community. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective matters more than you think. And if you want more stories like this, real, emotional, and meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.
Welcome to Boardroom Revenge Stories, a channel focused on workplace conflict, corporate betrayal, power struggles, and quiet justice. Our stories follow a structured workflow to deliver a consistent, immersive experience. We start by analyzing real discussions on Reddit, Facebook, Quora, and blogs. Next, we craft original scripts using AI tools like ChatGPT. We then use 11 Labs to transform text into high-quality voice and edit everything in CapCut for a smooth, cinematic finish. Thumbnails are designed with Canva, and every video is carefully reviewed before release. These stories go beyond entertainment, revealing how power truly works and how justice quietly unfolds.